C.M. Wendelboe of Cheyenne, Wyoming, is a prolific author of murder mysteries with a Western flair, as well as traditional Westerns. He entered the law enforcement profession when he was discharged from the Marines as the Vietnam War was winding down. During his 38-year career in law enforcement, he served in various roles for several agencies. Yet he always felt most proud of working the street. He was a patrol supervisor in Gillette, Wyoming, when he retired as a sheriff's deputy to pursue his true vocation as a fiction writer. So welcome, Hertz.
Tonight we're gonna kind of visit about how to write authentically about police and you know why are we even worried about that? Because we lie for a living, fiction writers. We make stuff up. And I call it Wendelboe's 10% rule. If I am writing a police procedural and 10% of my readership or 10% of the audience at the libraries will probably be industry professionals. It'll be police and deputies and dispatchers, evidence techs. And tell you, if I get one thing wrong out of that, they'll jump on me like a pack of crazed dogs, and I'll end up losing some readers. And same reason I don't write medical mysteries, because you would have industry professionals, probably 10% of your readership being nurses and doctors, nurses' aides and things, and so we need to write about law enforcement accurately, if we don't want to alienate it. So here's what I write. I have four different series, and they're all set in different eras and different locations, different jurisdictions. I have a period Western, and I have to worry about getting a local law enforcement angle right. I write one during the Great Depression. I have to have federal and tribal and local law enforcement, and I had a contemporary with have to know the PI laws and local laws, and then I have one set on Indian reservations, and that's contemporary, and I have to worry about making sure I get the federal and tribal laws right. And the point of all this is, whatever you write, it's going to be different depending on some areas. And I've been real broad because I can't cover everything, of course. But these are three areas where I think that writers probably have more trouble with when they're writing about the police. Police procedure on the law, equipment, technology at the time of the story, and we'll talk about some of the different eras and stuff as we go along. And then the low-hanging fruit is weapons, and that's where writers have the greatest difficulty in getting things accurate, but it's the easiest one to fix. So that in mind, I've also kind of lumped it into three different eras, only because if I did it chronologically, we'd be here forever on the advances in law enforcement things. So I'm now looking at the Old West as being 1870s, 1924, and as we go along, you'll see why I picked those particular dates. And Depression West, 1966, and then a modern West. And also, if you have any questions, go ahead and sing out and things as we go along. Okay, let's start with police procedure in the Old West. There was no Miranda warnings given because Miranda case didn't exist then. Fifth Amendment did, but officers never gave any kind of fifth warnings to anybody they arrested. And what they relied on a lot of the tracking skills, and some of the trackers were amazing on some of the things that they could analyze. And there's really little forensics in back in the old West. And I put up Heck Ramsey, old Paladin, when Richard Boone quit that series. Paladin, a few years later, he started one called Heck Ramsey. You can still find it on YouTube. And Heck Ramsey was this old lawman, and he was hired by a small modern police department. It looked like, from the uniforms and stuff, looked like around 1910, 1915, perhaps. So what old Heck brought to the department, besides his experience, was he had this old trunk with he carried around his forensics lab, and in one episode he cast a hoof print, and that led to the killer. In another instance, they used one of these stereophonic viewers that you see a lot of times in antique stores, and to compare bullets and stuff. So that's an area where, if you're writing about that time period, that'd be interesting to develop those forensics. And then, of course, in the old West, we didn't need no stinking search warrants. If we wanted to go in the house, it just wasn't in the house if there's a bad guy in there. So things are a lot different in procedure back then. And then we get to the Depression. Okay, in the Depression, there still wasn't any Miranda warnings given prior to any kind of interrogation. And smaller departments were springing up yet, all the metropolitans, police departments, Boston, Baltimore, New York, Chicago, LA. It was pretty well established, but during this time period, the smaller departments started to be developed, but officers had very little training, very little formal training. Even when I started out of service in '72, I started in South Dakota, and there was a pretty poor town, state. They didn't have an academy until a couple of years later. So a lot of the rural officers and stuff, particularly, had very little training. But I can still remember some of the old guys that I worked with. They still use their tracking skills once in a while, and so that's something also, if you're a writer, you might develop before. So, and then we get into the modern, what I call the modern, and the Miranda versus Arizona in '66. That changed the way police interrogated people and investigated crimes. And I don't know for certain, but I'll bet the number of coerced confessions that probably went down quite a bit. But 1966 is when that Miranda was. So if you got a character in 1950 and you read him Miranda rights, you're a little bit off on that. So, but Miranda is often overused in films and books and things. And imagine you got an officer and he's responding to a stop and rob. Maybe a 7-Eleven got hit and the clerk got shot. And your character officer comes onto the car, and he chases on, and the adrenaline is going through the roof on this officer, and maybe maybe the guy crashes through a fence and takes off running, and the officer jumps out of his car and runs after him, and the adrenaline's going up and up. He finally catches the guy and cuffs him up and stands him up. And the first thing he does is read him Miranda rights. Well, that ain't gonna happen unless you're like a 2 month rookie. What's more likely to happen is the officer will take the arrestee back to the car and put him in the back seat. And most cruisers nowadays are equipped with audio and visual. Yeah. And so if the guy's back to saying, boy, I sure wish I hadn't shot that guy, you can use that for conviction. Jailhouse confession, same way. If you put them in interrogation room, just, you step out. Interrogation room most have audio and video, and if the guy says the same thing, man, I sure wish I hadn't capped that guy. Well, you can use that if you do, as long as you don't ask them any question. If you ask them any particular question, then Miranda attaches, and Miranda doesn't attach when people leave free to leave the interrogation room. Anybody ever watch like Forensic Files and the 48 hours and ID discovery and things? And how many times have you seen those guys bring somebody into an interrogation room and leave them alone and back out, and if he doesn't say anything, well, might go in and you might tell the guy, you're free to leave. You don't have to be here. And when that happens, he's pretty free to ask me questions if the guy doesn't leave the interrogation room. Now, what's the suspect going to think? Well, if I leave the room, they're going to think I'm hiding something. So I'm going to stick around and I'll spot the cops. And so that's an area it can be pursued by right pretty easy. So then we always get some of the myths and things, and I like to use TV and movie examples because it's visual. But everything I talk about, I believe I've read the book. And cops not always goes lights and siren at crime scenes. They often use their lights and siren to clear traffic out of the way. But say your character officer responded to a home invasion, and the bad guy knows the cops are gonna arrive there. He just don't know when. And so the officer is going to douse his siren as soon as he can, going to cut off his red lights as soon as he can. He might even drive without any headlights. That's fairly common. So, and then a couple tropes. So the suspended officer goes back to the crime scene to solve the crime. Well, if he didn't have, if he couldn't solve the crime when he had all the resources in the department, he sure not gonna solve them now. And besides liability for him going back and trying to solve a crime, he wouldn't do that. So, and then the other thing is, say your character gets called to maybe a homicide, suicide at the house, and when the police arrive, they own that house. Whether it takes them 2 hours to process it or 2 days, they own that house. But when they step away, unless it's particularly labeled in the search warrant, when they step away, the chain of command, it says chain of custody, but the chain of command, I'm sorry, I did change it. The chain of custody is broken. And if they want to go in there, they're going to have to get another search warrant. And the problem is, if your character goes back in there without a search warrant, any good defense attorney is going to say that that evidence had been planted at some point. So the investigator returned the crime scene like that without the proper paperwork and things just, that just doesn't happen. So, but you read that all in books and stuff, I'm sure. So here we go into some of the equipment that we use in different areas.
Hey, Kurt,
Yes.
Sorry, when questions come in, do you want me to go ahead and ask you when the questions come in?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you talk about the tracking skills? Like what kind of things did they do then to track criminals down in a world where, like today, people are so visible and then they'd be so invisible? Like what did they do to track criminals back then?
Well,
like in the Old West?
I can address that pretty good. That was one of my skill sets when I was in law enforcement. I was a tracker, and pretty good tracker. And where I learned it is from the Border Patrol in Chula Vista when I was in the Marine Corps in 29 Palms. They gave us some classes, and I started to develop that. And the trackers will go out and he'll practice aging a track, for example. So he knows in whatever particular uh, part of the country is, it'll be different if you look at a track and you may be able to tell that it's 2 days old, or maybe able to tell that it's 2 hours old, and but it's not something that you just develop overnight. You have to keep practicing, and even nowadays, especially Border Patrol, they use tracking a lot yet, and some of those guys have been practiced for years and years. They're pretty amazing, and most of them use a tracking stick where they can record the stride in the shoe and things, and so they'll go on a track, and as long as it takes, and then they'll be on that. And so in the Old West, it was the same way. Good trackers, and not all lawmen were excellent trackers, but the good ones were. And it was the same thing. They had to go out and practice their tracking skills and things, and I was fortunate to use a lot of those in one of my series is set in the Old West. One of my characters is a master tracker, and you can tell a lot by looking at a track and stuff. Not just the direction, but you can often tell if someone favors one leg, for example, if he's had some injuries and things, and so it's just pretty interesting field, but it just takes a lot of work to develop that.
Could they actually get lost, like in a body of water, like you always see? Like once they hit water, is it harder to track?
Yeah, it's hard track if they go upstream. If someone goes upstream, it's quite a bit easier, because you'll get some sediment down if you're in a reasonable time. You know, so a lot of people in the Old West did throw trackers off going in the stream. And it's really hard. And so you're relying more. The trackers relying more going up and upstream and downstream and checking for rocks and checking for foliage that's it might be disrupted and things. It's hard on tracking someone that's crossed the creek.
Kevin wanted to know, cops can lie in the course of an investigation. Does that happen, and how far can they take it?
Yeah. Cops, they use the ruse and subterfuge is what they say. If you have a couple, maybe you got a couple suspects that you're bringing in for robbery, and you separate them, and it's perfectly okay to tell one of the guys, hey, your buddy just dimed you off, or your friend just give us all the information we need and stuff, and if the suspect believes that, he may spill the guts. And I've always said, if criminals were smart, cops would be out of a job. So I mean, most of the criminals will. I mean, I've had a lot of believe that sort of stuff.
Okay. I'll take two more quick ones and then we'll get back to any suggestions for an Old West lawman trying to keep ahead of the lynch mob? Like, do they talk the crowd down or leave the accused in jail for his own safety?
Well, a lot of movies and TV shows, it shows people getting broke out of jail to get strung up and things, and that happened once, but not to the extent that on television, movies and stuff. But there again, some of these smaller agencies and stuff, their lockup wasn't much at all. Some didn't even have bars. Some just had wooden gates, and put somebody in there. It's not going to take a lot to break them out, but it didn't happen as often as some books that have you believe in, and movies and things, but it did happen.
Okay. Well, I'll save the other two questions for a little bit later.
Okay. And some of the equipment in the Old West, especially out here, telegraphs were kind of iffy, especially with the Indians. Some of the movies say where the Indians dismantle and telegraph poles and things. That did happen, and it might be weeks before a line crew came back out and reestablished the telegraph. So, and lawmen back then, there was like one big camporee. They had all their gear in a pack mule, or maybe they had it in their saddle, and it was like a big camp out, except he was after some bad guys. So, and along this time, motor vehicles started being used, and I put Big Jake in a parentheses because if anybody remembers that show, it was John Wayne and his grandson got kidnapped, and so the regiment of the Texas Rangers, they was going to go after the bad guys in cars, and that was 1909. I think it was Oldsmobiles they driving. I wasn't sure, but motor vehicles really started coming in their own. And we didn't have the multimedia and stuff like we have now. You can go on the FBI's website, and find the 10 most wanted and things. You can find a lot of information. Back then, we didn't have much. The wanted posters often took several weeks to reach the law officer, and that was well after the crime occurred. And depression. Telephones started being used to pretty good advantage, and it's used at least one occasion to get ahead of the wild bunch. Back in I don't know, 1902, I think it's 1903, something like that. But telephones really started being used extensively then, and radios too. And in some of the bigger cities, radios began being installed in patrol cars, and so that, but the range and things were really poor. But out here, it took a little bit longer to get quality radios that actually has some distance to them. And then the reason I put for 1924 is, the FBI started doing evidence in 1924. And if you have your character, send something off the FBI lab in 1920, you're ain't cutting it. But 1924 is when they first started doing evidence, and their FBI lab didn't officially open until 1932. So that's kind of the time era we're looking at. And I put that on first time of comparison microscope where it used was in that same day, Valentine's Day massacre in 1929, where they matched a Thompson submachine gun and a couple of shotguns to the bad guys. So that's about where we're at as far as the depression. Now the modern West, oh my gosh, if you look on TV and you see some of these areas where science is getting into, it's just exploding. The fingerprint systems and DNA systems and things it's all computerized, and it's just making a heck of a good how should I put it? It's making things hard for the bad guys, and that's good. Especially some of this touch DNA where you just brush up against someone and have your hand swabbed, and all of a sudden you got a DNA. I put that down the bottom. The card is so solid by, I call them LPCs, leather personnel carriers, boot and shoes, and you're out banging on doors, and you're interviewing people, and you're talking to folks. That's how your character should be solving crimes. If they can use like DNA, for example, that's great, but it's too easy of a crutch. I think your stories would be better with the officer going out beating the bush, solving crimes that way. Okay, here's weapons, and I say weapons for the end, because like I said, that's the area where writers get it wrong more often, but it's the easiest to correct with just a little bit of research. Here's the first one. Bullets don't throw people backward. Newton's third law of equal opposite reactions, and so you got how many times in books and TV and movies you see someone gets shot and it throws them back 6, 7 feet. Maybe they crash against a wall. That's not going to happen. Bullets punch holes in people, and that's what they do. Your character might, when he's hit, he might slump or he might stumble or stagger, but he's not going to get thrown back violently like some movies and things. And then this of course firearms require loading, and that's one that we always kind of laugh at. I was watching an episode of Gunsmoker a couple weeks ago, and I wanted to count how many times this guy was shooting this 6-shooter, and I lost count at 30 times. He never did reload. So I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. And there's really a marked difference between automatic and semi-automatic weapons. The semi-automatic weapons, if you pull the trigger back, it'll shoot one time, and then if you don't release the trigger to set the sear, it won't shoot again. But of course, automatic weapons, you pull the trigger back, and unless it jams, run out of ammo, it'll fire. And then the other one, I read a couple books and I don't know how many TV series I saw. TV ready position where your character's on one side of the door and he's gonna bust in and the bad guys in there. He knows the bad guys in there and armed, and he's got the gun right up there, and he's ready. And what happens down the hall? Somebody kicks over a garbage can, or maybe somebody drops something, and that round goes off. Well, where's the round going to go off if he's got that TV ready position? So police aren't trained to carry to point their weapons like that, just for that reason. And then another thing, police often look like, well, they're going to go into a motel room, for example, and capture this bad guy. And the first thing they do before that is they charge their weapon. But that don't happen. Officers charge their weapon before they leave home, and they may do a press check once in a while, but they always have their weapons loaded. So that's one of those real big kind of fallacies. And then guns don't discharge themselves. And Alex Baldwin, that's a case that's been in the news quite a bit lately. And he claims that he didn't pull the trigger on this whole thumb buster. And all guns have a transfer bar, and you have to pull the trigger all the way down, all the way back to drop this transfer, whether it's a revolver or a semi-auto. And so he had to have pulled on all the way back, unless he was firing a Colt. And I don't know what the prop gun was, if it was a Colt or Ruger or one of these other brands. But if it's a Colt didn't have any transfer bar like that. That's why the old cowboys and things, they always carry an empty chamber under their hammer, because if they fell off their horse or hit against a tree or something like that, it would fire the weapon. And so you may have a case depending on what kind of gun the prop gun is. Yeah. And then here's another one that kind of a pet peeve is assault guns. Really no real definition of what assault gun is. The only time I know that the gun was actually called an assault gun was the World War One era uh, Winchester pump shotgun. It had a pump shotgun and it had a bayonet that you fixed on the end of it, and that's what you assaulted the German lines with. They called it an assault gun, and that's the only one that I could find that actually call that. So warning shots, you know, police don't give warning shots because if they do, that bullet has to go up, and at some point it's going to come down. If it comes down in a playground a block away, for example, you can ask them no problem. So officers don't give warning shots, and they don't shoot to wound; they shoot to stop. You know, getting a gunfight and adrenaline is through the roof and things, and your accuracy goes down, and you're sure not going to shoot the wound. So that's something that's you know, a lot of books get wrong as well. Okay, so let's go real quick over some of the weapons in here. If you're writing about the Old West, your character will probably be shooting a black powder weapon. If anybody's ever seen recreations of like Gettysburg, for example, and all the people are lined up and they shoot all at once, and the black powder is so bad you can't even see the enemy. So they'll probably be shooting black powder. Smokeless powder came into being, or the French invented it in 1886 for the LaBelle cartridge, and so we're probably transitioning this time. And if lawmen had one gun, it'd be a shotgun, only because it's so versatile. And if your character is a lawman, for example, and he's holding a shotgun on a bad guy, and say he's shooting a 311 Stevens, and he cocks the hammer back. Well, you're gonna have a problem there because that particular model never had a external hammer. So it just takes a moment to research that, get it right. And really, some of the old lawmen weren't very proficient in the firearms. I mean, when you're getting $30 a month and the cost of practice were just really prohibitive. And if you're writing about this time, throw something odd in, like these break top pistols, the old Schofields, like Jesse James used to carry, Tom Selleck and Conagher. It's just a little bit something, a little bit different to think of. Any more questions, Margaret? Any more questions?
Yeah, there are a few. Let's see.
Yeah. Should we wait to the end?
Is it easy to get a search warrant just based on suspicion? How much time does it usually take?
Oh, yeah. You have to have more than suspicion. Even you have to have more than reasonable suspicion. You have to have a particular, and Matthew can probably address this a lot better than I ever could. But yeah, you have to have something tangible. Now whether it's maybe information from a CI, a confidential informant, or if it's some area that the officer has developed as far as far as evidence goes. You can get a search warrant. Now the old days, we used to do the reservation search warrants. That was, you'd have to go in a house and the guy was inside the house and he wouldn't open up for you. And so one guy ran around back and the guy in front banged on the door and one in the back said, "Come in." And so you'd bust in and when the court asked who told you to come in, why did you say, "I don't know. Some of you will come in. I didn't see him." We're not lying, but he sure couldn't get by with that nowadays. So you have to have something pretty substantial to get a search warrant. And a lot of search warrants are pretty boilerplate. And some I've gotten search warrants and within a matter of 10 minutes stopping at judge's office because just a matter of them, printing the thing off and sign his name. So search warrants are fairly easy to get if you have the proper justifications.
So is it true that judges are like on call where you can get a search warrant pretty quickly? I mean,
yeah, we always had judges in like rotation, and whoever night it was or day, we'd go wake them up and they'd want to get rid of us as soon as they could. So, yep.
so Sue wanted to know, were profilers ever used or some early version of that?
Would the profilers use what?
Were they ever used like at a crime scene, or was there some kind of early version of what's considered like a profiler today?
Well, profiler, there's a couple of TV series that have profilers that stop at crime scenes and things. And profilers don't operate that way. They'll look at crime scene photographs. They'll interview officers. They'll get a pretty broad picture of what the crime was and stuff. But profilers don't, unless there's some reason they don't stop the crime scenes. I mean but that's what's portrayed in quite a few books and TV. Profile is more of a, I don't know. Sometimes they get it incredibly accurate, or sometimes they don't. But that's just one more tool that your character can use.
Mike wanted to know, Sherlock Holmes was kind of an early profiler, no?
And he had a way, yeah. He looked at the totality of the crime and who was involved in things. But, he'd go and he'd get his daily dose of cocaine and stuff, and he'd have he'd have some revelations, and yeah, I guess you can say he was probably an early profiler. Yeah.
And regarding weapons, are there any good research sites to get weapon details right?
Yeah, actually, at the end of this, I'm going to I've got some listing. If anybody sends me their email address, I'll send this PowerPoint to them, and that'll be at the end of it. I'll have some resources there.
Okay.
Yeah. Another thing is the Citizen Police Academy. I run one up an old agency for about 10, 11 years, and it was a good opportunity for officers to share to the public what they actually do, and depending on what type of program, it can either be it can be 6 weeks long or be 12 weeks long, and every night, usually it's 3 hours a night, once a week, you learn something else about policing, and yeah, it's really a good resource if you got the time to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, now we're getting into some of the weapons that during the Depression was. And a lot of old lawmen still use some busters, the old single action Colts. So those could still be used. And the first successful semi-automatic weapon was 96 Mauser. It called it a broom hand. And I read a book some years ago where the character was a bad guy, and he was keeping the lawman at bay with his broom handle Mauser, and he ran out of ammo, and he inserted a new magazine. And the problem with that, this if you look at it, this broom handle Mauser should have a detachable magazine, but it isn't. It's loaded on the top like a 10-round stripper clips, though. So that was something really glaring that it would only take just a moment to pull up and research, like most of these. When the Colt 1911 was introduced, a lot of semi-auto handguns started to be used by law enforcement and bad guys. So, particularly the guys that come back from the war, they was familiar with the Colt 1911, and a lot of the guys started carrying it. But the criminals during this time, they started having a lot of exotic weapons, Thompson submachine gun. And I say submachine gun, that I wouldn't make or break a story, but if you're talking about weapons, the submachine gun is any fully automatic weapon that fires a pistol cartridge. Thompson fires a 45. Uzi, a submachine gun, fires a 9mm. Heckler & Koch HK5 is a submachine gun because it's 9mm. It's just one of those little things that tweak the story a little bit. And during this time, some criminals started using the Browning automatic rifle, and Bonnie and Clyde carried one. It was a cut down version, and law enforcement was way outgunned when they went up against these, because law enforcement didn't have anything that powerful, because that weapon fires a 30-06, and the rest more powerful than pistol cartridges. So, and then modern, with Vietnam vets started returning after the war, they started using platforms that was familiar with, and I use the M16 as an example, because the officers were more likely to use an AR-15, which is a semi-auto version of the M16. So, but it was something I was familiar with. And before the Gun Control Act of 1968, you could just buy guns over the mail. I mean, look, Lee Harvey Oswald bought that 6.5 car Cano he used over the mail. When I got out of the service, 72, I bought a couple surplus military rifles because they was curios, but no more. They closed all our loopholes, and now can't buy any weapons through mail. And then beginning with in the 80s, especially with the introduction of the Glock, because so many agencies started using the Glock. Very few revolvers were left, to be carried by officers. But when you use a particular semi-auto handgun like a Glock or a SIG or a Colt, it just takes a moment to research which ones have safety. I read an A-list author that I really liked, but in two different books he had his character take the safety off the Glock, and Glocks don't have safety. I say that's one of those things that takes just a moment to research. And here are some dates. If you have your character in 1920s come up being public enemy number one, that's not going to happen. Al Capone is the first one, but that's 1930. Same with FBI's 10 Most Wanted. This Thomas James Holden, he escaped from Leavenworth and murdered his wife and some of those things. That was 1950. It was the first time 10 Most Wanted was even talked about. So, and even now you can go on the FBI's website. It's kind of interesting and look at their 10 Most Wanted. And this one, National Farms Act, NFA, 1934. If you have your character going in a gun shop in like 1930, and he wants to buy a fully automatic Thompson submachine gun, he can do it because they could sell him that. But with the NFA Act in 1934, that was no longer possible. That was against the law. And one till 1968, until the feds established that you had to go through a registered dealer in order to purchase your weapon or sell your weapon. And that was the first time that really had to have a paper trail. So your character can have, in the 50s, if you're writing one of the 50s, he can go in a gun store and buy a gun, and there wouldn't be any paper trail for him. And the last one is this National Firearms Owners Protection Act. Prior to 1986, your character could buy a brand new fully automatic weapon, but after this was passed, you couldn't buy a fully automatic weapon, a brand new one. Now you can go through the hoops and pay your transfer tax and things and buy a fully automatic weapon, but it wouldn't be a new one. It would be one manufactured before 1986. And a lot of those are some of the high-end ones, the Thompsons and the BARs, and some of those, you can look at, getting $40,000 stuck into a gun. Then lastly, these are some resources. Like I say, if you send me your email, I'll send you this PowerPoint stuff. So to kind of wrap it up, there's so many areas of law enforcement that you can get right, but in just a little bit of research. And officers, most officers, if you go up and talk to them, they'll be happy to visit with you on whatever area you want to talk to them about. most officers are pretty approachable. So.
So there's some more questions. Where do gangs and bad guys today get their weapons?
Most of them are illicit. They, you can go. You have to go in a gun store, and you have to have a waiting list. I mean, a waiting period. Most bad guys sure don't want to do that because then if they get caught, they'll have a paper trail. So most of them get the guns off of other criminals and things, and I took a lot of guns away from bad guys that had taken a grinder to the serial number and things. So that's where most of the criminals get them. The law-abiding people, they'll go in the gun store and go through all the paperwork and hoops and things, but the criminals, they kind of bypass that.
And Mike wanted to know, how easy is it to convert a semi-auto to automatic?
Some isn't possible, just about possible. Some of the early AR-15s that was sold back in the 70s and 80s, they was able to be converted, and some M1As, which is a civilian version of the M14. Some of those early ones was able to have conversion kits, but now it's just about impossible to convert a semi-auto to a full auto.
Okay. Is it true there is no gun registry like most people think?
Well, the registry, I think I think every dealer has to keep their files for 7 years, I think. So if your character buys a gun in a gun store, and 5 years later the feds want to find out if he actually bought that, the paperwork will still be there. So as far as the national registry, that's as close as we got to it.
But they would have to know where the gun was purchased.
Yeah, they'd have to know which firearms dealer sold a weapon, and the firearms dealer would have to show the paperwork.
So if they didn't know where the person bought the gun, there's really no way. There's not like a national registry where they could look it up.
Well, I know the federal firearms dealers have to give the AT&F a copy of all the sales and things. Now, I don't know if that's been computerized yet or not, but if it has, they have a record of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last time I talked to somebody from the ATF, they were pretty adamant, like they could not just go and find out where a gun was sold.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know
Which I think a lot of people think that they can do that, and they can't.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah. No. Now where they can, if a gun's stolen, it's entered into NCIC, which is a national database. Then if you caught your bad guy and he was able to accomplish the serial number, that NCIC stays in there just about forever. So I've recovered some weapons from a guy. When I worked, and he had purchased them down in Kentucky, and they were stolen out of New York 22 years before that. So it always stays in the database and things.
That's all the questions I have in chat. Why don't we open it up? If anybody has any questions, you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
That's the only thing I'd add is so many areas of law enforcement you can get accurately just by a few moments of research. And if you haven't been to a citizen police academy, that's a really a good way to just about every facet of law enforcement kind of get a feeling and some of that information that you get off as you may be able to use stories just to get it to get it accurately.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's hard as a writer because it seems like there's county laws and state laws, and you really do have to talk about it with somebody who's actually doing that at that location, wherever you're setting that.
Absolutely. And tribal laws are just a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, I have a lot of questions about tribal law, so I may hit you up about that.
Okay. And that's the nice thing about this organization. We have so many subject matter experts and stuff. And if you have a question on something, shoot me an email. Just CM Wendelboe, my last name, at Wyoming.com. Wyoming spelled out, and I'll get back to you.
Is it CM Wendelboe with no dots?
Yeah, yep, CM Wendelboe, all jammed together at Wyoming.com.
So I have a question. I wondered, do you have like a favorite Old West novel or movie that you like, that you consider is really accurate?
I think my favorite is Cheyenne. Yeah, and that was and not just because it was the only movie actually filmed in Wyoming over by the Teton, but Alan Ladd just nailed that. And Jack Palance was a bad guy at it. You don't get any worse bad guy than Jack Palance. And it was the storyline was I thought was just great. So every time that comes on, I watch it. So, but Louis L'Amour, of course, had just a ton of good westerns and things. But he also wrote other things. So he wrote, and I read it at least once a year because I'm trying to figure out why it's such a fascinating read. And it was a science fiction that Louis L'Amour wrote. It was Haunted Mesa, and I got it on my Kindle, and about once a year I read it because it's so fascinating, but I don't know why. So.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions?
Appreciate you dropping in. I will have the banquet for the night. No?
I might throw in a comment that I think I've made before, but I watched the first 48 religiously, because it's just fascinating to watch everyday police work, everyday detective work, and while as writers we like to go with the sexy stuff, you know, the CSI stuff, it's just remarkable how many of these cases are solved by plain old detective work and interrogation and shoe leather. So, yeah.
And it's more, it's a more interesting read too. You know, rather than rely on like DNA or fingerprints or some whiz bang thing like that. It's just almost can be like a crutch. So you're right. You know, if your character can solve the crime by beating down doors and talking to people, and makes for a much more interesting read.